Welcome to Next Gen AppTech. Hello everyone, I am Anand. Today we'll be going through the topic of variables and constants. So what are variables? Variables is something which we store the data into. As we all know, in our program, most of the time we have to deal with the data. We have to process the data. So store those data, we need to have something that is called a variable. And also the data inside those variables can vary. That's why we say it's variable. It can vary upon. Now the syntax of the variable is data type and the identifier, like what kind of data it is going to store and the name of that variable. For example, int I. And now the initialization of the variable in C# is very much necessary. If you will not initialize, the compiler is going to throw the error. So I'm going to show you that. We declared the variable int I and we have not initialized the variable yet now. So now you'll see that even if we are not initialized, the compiler is not going to throw the error. The compiler will only throw the error when we are going to use this variable. So now if we will try to build the solution, so the build of this will build successfully. Now if we will try to use this variable inside a method like console.writeLine, now we'll try to build the solution. It is going to fail because it is saying that use of unassigned local variable. So we need to assign some value. So we will be assigning the value like this. We can assign the value here also, or we can assign later also. But before the use of that variable, we have to assign the variable. Now we can also, as we can see in the third point, is saying if we declare and initialize more than one variable in a single statement, all the variables has to be of the same data type. So it means we can have another variable of name j, and we can also initialize the value some 10, and we can use this variable as well. So it is saying that we can have more than one variable inside a statement, but the data which we are going to store should be of the same type. So here if we are declaring a variable of integer and we are declaring another variable of j, then we need to have a value of type integer. If we'll try to assign some other value, suppose we are assigning it some other value as integer, string, then it is going to throw me an error that it cannot implicitly convert type string to int, as the compiler is expecting a value of integer type. So we need to do that. Okay, now why is initialization very much necessary? So the purpose of initialization is it prevents us from unintentionally retrieving junk values from memory left over from other programs. Okay, as we know, as we will go little deeply into the initialization of variables. Initialization of variables happens in two ways in C#. As we initialize the variables inside the method, we declare the variables inside a method and we initialize it. So these variables are called method variables. Now if we can have another set of variables which we declare inside a class. So suppose we have a class called my name, and in this we have a variable called number. And now you can see I have not initialized this variable. So it is acceptable in C#, because when we will use this variable, how we will use this, we have to create first an object of this class, and then the object of this class is created by the new keyword. And now in the console.writeLine method, I'm going to use this variable. Now you can see I have used this variable and I'm not initialized it, still I have used it, and it will run successfully. So what value it is going to then show? It is going to show its default value. The compiler shows its default value. The default value of integer is 0. So how this default value is initialized? Who initializes it? So whenever we create an object of this class using the new keyword, the default constructor of this class gets called, and that default constructor initializes its value. So we say initialization happens automatically. Suppose if we have another variable called string, then the name of the variable, let's keep it as name. Now we are showing that value, retrieving that value name. Now we're running it, so the default value of this integer is empty string. As you can see, the cursor over here is here, it's not at here, so it is creating a blank space. It means that the default value of integer is space, empty space. So variables that are fields in a class or struct, if not initialized explicitly, gets initialized to its default values when an object is created with the help of a default constructor. Now what are implicitly typed variables? Implicitly typed variables are those variables in which we don't need to put the data type. We use the var keyword instead of data type, and we simply initialize the value. So initialization is must. If we will not initialize it, then it is going to throw me a compile time error. Now as soon as the compiler compiles it, it is compiler assigns its data type basis of the value which we assign. So we have assigned a type of integer value. So we'll hover over the mouse of this variable and we can see that this type of this variable becomes system.in32. So that's how implicitly typed variable works. So we should use implicitly typed variable in those conditions in which we are not aware of what kind of data type it is coming. So it is advisable to the user, to the developer, that use only when you don't know what kind of data type you are going to assign into some variable. As we'll see in our later video session, the more use of implicitly typed variable. And also the other point says, okay, now these are also called type inference. Why it is called type inference? Because at compile time, compiler infers what type of data this variable is going to store and then decides its data type. So that's why we can also say type inference. Okay, now there are a few rules that we need to follow while using var. The variable must be initialized, as we know that in C#, we have to initialize the variable. Otherwise, compiler cannot deduce what data type is it of, and the initializer value cannot be null. So if we'll try to give the value of null here instead of giving some another value, and we try to build it, then it is going to throw me an error that cannot assign null to an implicitly typed local variable. So we have to give some value over here. Another point is the initializer must be an expression, so we have to give an expression. And the fourth point is we cannot set the initializer to an object unless we create a new object in the initializer. So what does it mean? So we can say that in this line of statement we are creating an object of this my class by writing this new keyword. So if we'll remove this new and the class name and simply write this, so we are creating a reference variable of my class. In this we have not created an object and assigned the reference of that object to this variable. So now if we'll try to create an implicitly typed variable and assign this reference variable into it, so it is going to throw me an error, and that error it will say again that use of unassigned local variable, as we have not created any object and we have not assigned the reference of type of object of this my class into this variable. Now we'll see the scope. What is in scope? The scope of a variable. The scope of variable is the area of code from which the variable can be accessed. So as long as the scope lives, we can access those variables. If we are out of that scope, then we cannot access that variable. And the scope is determined by the following rules. The first rule says that a local variable that is declared in a for, while or similar statements is in scope in the body of that loop. So how does this works? I'm going to show you. So I have written code already for this so that it doesn't take much time. So here I am going to have a two for loop, and I have just used the two for loop. In the first for loop, inside the loop body I have created a variable I, and I've initialized it and I've used it in this for loop, and I'm using it in the console.writeline. So the scope of this I is up to here only. As soon as the closing braces compiler encounters the closing braces, the scope of this integer variable dies, because It says that the rule says that if we create a variable or declare a variable inside a loop, then the scope of that loop is till the body of that loop, and the body completes here up to this process. After this, the scope dies. So we can create another variable of the same name inside another loop. So this I and this I is completely different because the scope is completely different. Now the another law says what? A local variable is in scope until a closing brace indicates the end of the block statement or method in which it was declared. So what does it mean? So it means like if we are creating or declaring and creating another variable at the method level, not inside a loop. So if we are creating a variable j and initializing it with the value 20, so the scope of this variable is for the whole method. The whole method means the scope of the variable will be up to here. So outside of this closing braces of this method, the scope dies, but it is inside this whole method. So if we try to create another variable of the same name within the same scope or within the child scope, the child scope is this for loop, or if we try to create another variable of the same name here as well, so the compiler is not going to allow me. Why? Because the scope clashes. So within the same scope or its child scope, we cannot have the two variables of the same name. So it will not allow. As you can see, the error message is going to show is local variable name j cannot be declared in this scope because it would give a different meaning to j, which is already in a parent or current scope to denote something else. So the j at here is the parent variable, or its scope is parent to this variable. Now if we try to create another variable on the same scope, so it will again throw me an error, and the error is the local variable name j is already defined in the scopes. So within the same scope, we cannot have the two variable of the same name as well as in the child scope. So that's what it says. So this is scope clashes, you can say. Okay, now a field or a member variable of a class is in scope as long as its containing class is in scope. What does this mean? So suppose I have a class, my class, inside that I have variable, a class variable, just that we saw what is a class variable, and that we have a class variable called num, and we have another method, we have a method called display. Inside that again I'm creating a variable, method variable, and I'm using the same name. So how does this C# compiler is going to distinguish between? So C# compiler distinguish between, and that's why it is allowing us to build the solution successfully. Because as you can say that C# compilers distinguish between a class variable as well as a method variable. So simply if we are using inside this method variable, this variable, so the value of this variable comes as 30. Now if suppose what if we want to use this variable class variable, then we can use this keyword. Now, now if I can show you that the two value will be different. The first, it will show us the value 30 because it takes its this value, and the second it will take as 10. So for to use it, we have to create an object of this class by creating the new keyword, and then in the console.writeLine, sorry, I don't need to use console.writeLine because I have already a method inside. So I'm going to use that method called display, and I'm going to simply run the program. So as we'll run the program, we can see that the value is 30 and that 10. So 30 comes how? So that 30 means that the value of the local variable or a method variable. So it is taking the value of the method variable, and this statement is taking the value of the class variable. So in this way we can have the two variable of the same name, as the compiler distinguishes between the method variable and as well as the class variable. So scope clashes, we cannot declare variables having same name within the same scope as just we saw. However, if we have a field or a class variable and a method variable within the same scope, we can declare the two variables having same name because C# distinguishes between two variables. So we can say that C# has a mechanism to distinguish between the class variables and the method variables. Okay. Now to use field variable, we can use class name if it is a static variable and this keyword if it is an instance variable. We just saw an example of instance variable. We can see for static variable how this works. So instead of instance variable, we can create a static variable simply by putting the static keyword. So now if we want to access this variable inside this method apart from our using our own method variable of the same name, we can simply write the class name to this. So we can write my class and we can see, and now we can see what value it is going to show. So it is going to show again the same value, that is 30 and 10, 30 for the method variable and 10 for the class variable, as you can see here. So in this case what happens, how the C# distinguishes between the two variables, and in this case method variables has a higher precedence, so it hides the field variable or the class variable by default. Now what are constants? Constants, as whenever we create a program, in sometimes we need some kind of value that we don't want to change at any point of time once we have declared and initialized it. Say for example a bank interest rate. So bank interest rate doesn't change a lot. It changes after 6 months or 1 year. So in our program, if we have declared a variable of rate of the bank of interest uh, which it gives loan, so I don't want any developer or anybody to change at any point of time. And I also don't want that if suppose I have declared and initialized the rate of interest of that bank, that from any part of the code I don't want to change it. To achieve that thing we need constant. So constant is a type of variable whose value cannot be changed for its whole lifetime. This is very important. And the syntax of constant is simply as we declare a variable, we give the data type and the variable name and initialize it. So just before that we give a word called const constant. So constant const int rate equals to 10. Now this is very much important point, that it must be initialized at the time of declaration and the value cannot be changed afterwards. So I'm going to show you how this is going to happen. So I have to just put a const keyword and int and rate. Now as you can see I have declared a constant of type integer and the name of the constant is rate. So at any point of time if we'll try to change the value, it is going to throw me an error. So as you can see, if we try to build this solution, so it's going to throw me an error that the left hand side of an assignment must be a variable property or indexer. It cannot be a constant, so we cannot assign a value again to a constant. So once it is assigned forever. We cannot change it. Now the second point third point was it must be initialized at the time of declaration and value cannot be changed afterwards. So it means like for you can say for a normal instance variable, we declare a variable and initialization is necessary before at the time of using. So before the use of that variable, we have to initialize for an instance variable. So like now I have declared a variable, an instance variable, and I have not initialized it at the time of declaration. I am initializing it at a later point of time. I am going to build a solution. It will build fine. The compiler will not have any problem. Why? Because it allows us to initialize the value later on. But for the case of constant, it is not at all allowed. It is not at all possible. So if we have declared a variable constant and I'm trying to initialize it in the second statement and I'm trying to build this, So it is not going to allow me. So constant field requires a value to be provided. So it is asking a value. Compiler is seeking a value, that where is the value. So value we have not initialized it at the time of declaration. That is the much very important point. We have to initialize the value at the time of declaration as well. So the value which we are initializing must be known at the compile time. So it is again an important point. We cannot assign any variable to it, and also we cannot assign those. Okay, now we cannot assign any variable to it. So for example, I have a variable int num equals to 10, and I have a constant of type integer named num rate, and I'm going to assign the value at the time of declaration with the variable num. I'm trying to build it, so it's not going to allow me, because the expression being assigned to rate must be a constant. It cannot be a variable. It has to be constant. It has to be some value. So we have to give some value. And also it is saying that the value at the compile time should be known. So we cannot give some value like datetime.now. So the datetime.now evaluates at the runtime. It doesn't evaluates at the compile time. So if we'll try to give those value, and if we try to assign the value to a constant, here I'm assigning, declaring a value of type in a string, and here I'm initializing with the date time now. So it is again throwing me an error and is saying that expression being assigned to time must be constant. And now also one more point, we cannot make a constant a static variable, though it is implicitly always static in nature. As you can see, we cannot change the value of a constant, so it means like it is static in nature, but it doesn't mean that we can initialize like we can declare a static keyword for it as well. So if we'll try to do that, it is going to throw me an error. Like if we try to do static constant and we try to build it, so it is going to throw me an error that static is not allowed here. Constant static we try to put here, it is again not allowing me, as you can see. So we cannot make a constant a static variable, or it is implicitly always static in nature. So we cannot put like this. So what are the advantages of using constants? I just say that for a bank interest rate we can use it, and we can also constant help us by replacing some constant numbers or some magic numbers, like the value of pi is 3.14. So every time we have to use 3.14. So instead of that, we can declare a constant of name pi and assign the value 3.14, and we can use it anywhere in our program. And now like it also helps us make modification of some constant value easier. Like for the bank interest rate, if we have compiled our program and we have released our program, our project application, and the bank interest rate is supposed 10.5%, and at the later after 6 months bank says that the client says that okay, now the bank interest is 11.0%. So in order to do that, we just have to make it changed at one place only, not at all the places. And also it also helps by preventing committing mistakes in our program. So like if we'll not use a constant, and like suppose by mistake if we assign another value into the constant, and the compiler will throw a compile time error. So by mistake, if a developer again tries to assign a value into the constant, the compiler is not going to allow. Just we saw that once we have declared and initialized the value of a constant, we cannot again assign it. So that is the advantages of the constant. So that was it for today. Thank you for watching, and if you find any error in this video session, or if you have any questions related to it, please feel free to write in the comment section below. And you can also download this presentation by clicking on the link given in the description of the video. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day. Bye.